All right, everyone, welcome back to ICU. I am so excited today. I have Ashley Jacobson with me. She is a disability civil rights lawyer. Did I even say that right, Ashley?
Yes. Yep. You got it.
Me, and I said it and I was like, oh my God, did I say this right?
Yeah, that was perfect.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming on. And I'm just really excited. Like I was excited before today, but today we found out that, or I found out that you have IC as well. So I'm even more excited to get into all of that.
Yeah. And it's funny because I rarely in person meet people that also have IC, or maybe they just don't talk about it. And so I love connecting with other IC people online.
Yeah. So can you share a little bit about your IC journey?
Yeah. So in college, I was around 19 and I was starting to have all of these weird symptoms that I had never had before. Abdominal pain. I was having to go to the bathroom a lot, and I was becoming really sensitive to foods, though I hadn't determined kind of what type of food was or drink was the issue yet. And at the time, when you're in college, I was a college student, and you go to the student health center and you say, oh, I'm having to pee a lot. They're going to say, oh, it's probably a UTI. Like they just assume that. And so they would do a lab test, and they would put me on antibiotics, and I wouldn't feel any better, but then I wouldn't hear anything back from them. And so I just assumed that I kept having these UTIs. And about the sixth or seventh time it happened in the course of a year, I decided to call up the lab and say, what are these lab results? Like, are these actually UTIs? And they said, no, the tests all came back negative. And so then I'm like, what the heck? Why is this 19, 20-year-old person having to pee all the time? And like, why are certain foods making me really nauseated? Why is my pain getting really bad? And it was around the same time I started having symptoms about 2 months after I ran a half marathon. So then part of me was like, did I just push my body too hard? Like, what is going on? I wound up going in for surgery for a laparoscopy for endometriosis, which they suspected after I made them suspect that might be it. And they found endometriosis in the surgery. And I thought, oh, now I'm going to be feeling so much better because they're going to remove the endo cells and I'll be fine. I'll go back to my quote unquote normal life. And I wasn't improving. And so a few more months go by and I'm seeing all these different specialists. And I ultimately wound up finding a specialist in Kentucky because I heard that they were just amazing there. And that's where they ultimately did a bunch of tests and determined that I had IC. And so then I'm adjusting to trying all these new treatments, like medications and bladder installations, which if you've never heard of or done a bladder installation before, when you're learning that they're going to do bladder treatments using catheters, it's the scariest thing like you could ever think of happening to you, especially when you're like 20, 21.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a big adjustment period, but my pain was honestly the worst symptom for me. And it got so bad that I wasn't able to sit up straight. I wasn't able to sleep through the night. And it got so bad to the point where I couldn't even like walk to the bathroom on my own. And I had to take some time off of school. I had to adjust eventually my college schedule to be all online, which, showing my age a little bit, but back then that wasn't as common. And luckily my university, Western Michigan University, they were amazing and they allowed me to finish my last year of college online. But it was really, really difficult at first, adjusting to the diet, the medications, the treatments, and being a fairly young person, going to the urologist with like a lot of elderly people and just feeling kind of misunderstood and not represented by anyone else that could relate to it.
Right. No, I can relate to that completely. Like I went to my first urologist at 18 and I just felt so out of place there. And everything after that, like nothing ever changed. It is
Right.
a strange feeling. So yeah, you're
Yeah.
not with that. And going through college with these symptoms, it's not fun.
No. And like people are like partying and you can't, well, for me, at least with my IC, I can't have alcohol. So, it was, I found like I was being excluded from a lot of things for the first time. And I looked on the outside to be healthy. So it was difficult for like a lot of my friends to understand. And at the time I was dating somebody and I was living with him. And we'd been together for 4 years. And when I got sick, I mean, he just like could not handle it. Like didn't want to go to the hospital with me, wanted nothing to do with it. Like didn't want to miss watching the hockey game on TV. So like, I mean, I dumped him, but
yes,
it was definitely like a huge adjustment in my life. I feel like it turned my life upside down. And I got so bad that I was in the hospital like once a week at one point. And I ultimately researched a ton online and I went to the University of Michigan where they were doing a study for IC. And that's what connected me with my surgeon who implanted like an experimental, it's not quite InterStim, but kind of a similar device in my spine that helps with my bladder pain and other bladder symptoms.
Okay. So now how are you doing?
I would say that since I got my device implanted initially in 2012, it drastically improved my quality of life. But I would say my daily bladder pain is still around a 5. But it was a 10. So like I'm able to work now and I'm able to like go to the grocery store and, enjoy doing some of the things I like to do. But on a daily basis, it's still, I would say, a 4 or 5. And then I'll have flare-ups every now and then, which I'm dealing with one right now where the pain will go up. We'll have to readjust my medical device. I'll have to go back on the bladder installations for a while, being a little bit stricter with my diet.
Yeah, I know. It's tough when you have to do that with your diet. It's like we are such a food-centered society. And like, I feel like the majority of people I talk to with IC, they tell me, oh, I'm a foodie. And I'm just like, me too. Like, is this across the board? We all just love food.
Oh, totally. Well, and I have to say, I'm pretty lucky. I don't live as close to her now, but my sister is a chef. So whenever I would see her, she would always like customize the meals to what I could have. But Oh my gosh, I miss like regular pizza with tomato sauce. That's like the big thing that I miss.
Yeah, no, it's tough when you learn what foods do trigger you and it's like something that you love. Have you ever tried making pizza with like a roasted red pepper sauce?
No, I haven't, but I love to make white pizza with like Alfredo sauce. That's like my substitute.
I'm going to send you a recipe for a no-mayo sauce. And
I'd love that.
Make it. Yeah.
That would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I know you're in a flare. So if you have to like do a TV timeout to go to the bathroom, let me know. We're all about that accommodation.
There you go.
Right now. So let's use that as a segue. So how did you end up, or what made you become a disability civil rights lawyer?
Yeah. So I actually when I first got diagnosed with IC and I left that a-hole boyfriend, I was like, what am I going to do? Like, how am I going to adapt to life with my new chronic illness, which are forms of disabilities? And I'm like, I wanted to be a teacher and work with children with disabilities. But then I was like, I can't stand for 8 hours a day and teach and run around. And I started really thinking about how I could still pursue my passions in a way that worked for my body and my health needs. And so I went to grad school for disability counseling and assessment to basically be a therapist for people who are sick and have other forms of disability. And then I was working as a counselor in that role. And I had a caseload after grad school, I was working for a nonprofit and for a university. And so many of my counseling clients were dealing with legal issues. And I kept trying to find lawyers in the community that had a good background on disability and, not just things like Social Security disability benefits, which are important, but how you should accommodate any area of law to somebody with health or disability needs. And, the way that we interact in the world as people with chronic illness is very similar to the way non-sick people operate in the world. And so, people with disabilities, they still, need legal help with the criminal justice system, with divorces and PPOs and like anything else. But I couldn't find a lawyer to help with even those things for my clients that had disabilities. And so I was like, you know what? Somebody should do something about this. And so but then ultimately I had a client who called the police for help and when she was mugged. And when the police arrived, because of her disability, they couldn't understand what she was saying. So they actually arrested her.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't find out about it until after she already took a plea deal. And then nothing could be done. And that was what made me sign up for the LSAT. And I was like, I want to really create a law office that works with people with disabilities, whether it's what I have or what other people have, because our legal system is just not handling things well right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's ultimately what I did.
Yeah. So how long have you been doing this?
It's been, let me think, 4, almost 5 years.
Okay. And
so I got a little bit of a later start because I went to grad school and had another job first. But
Right. No, I love that you followed your passion and are just trying to help as many people as you can. What does your day-to-day work look like?
Yeah, so I mostly represent people in employment and education law. And so I work for myself, which is also great. Created Jacobson Law and Advocacy. I got to throw a little plug out there.
Love that.
And I also on the side use my counseling and consulting background to do workplace trainings and things like that as well. But with my law office, I typically take on cases where somebody comes to me and they say, for example, I have IC and I'm not getting enough bathroom breaks at work. My work supervisor is telling me I can't go to the bathroom more than a couple times a day and it's not working out. I'm worried I'm going to lose my job. Or they might say, I have to get surgery. I have a cystoscopy coming up and I am being told that I can't have surgery or I'm going to get fired. And so my role is to assess how their disability can be accommodated in the work setting, or if maybe you're in college and you need a little bit of time off or you need to reschedule a final exam because of a health issue. That's another common thing I see. But really identifying ways that you can stay on the path you want to be on while meeting your disability needs. And so my day is, I'm doing a lot of phone calls with clients. I'm going to court. We have a lot of remote court hearings right now. And I also represent a lot of kids who get in trouble with the law because 60 to 80% of kids in our juvenile system have disabilities.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, I really enjoy it. It's an area of law that when I decided to go to law school, a lot of lawyers were like, I haven't seen a law office that focuses on disability specifically outside of disability benefits. But it's been very steady work. I love what I do. And I feel like I can really empathize with my clients and what they go through because I've been through it too.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So, I see it. Do you have any other, disabilities that you're open to talking about?
Yeah. So I also have lupus. That was diagnosed a couple of years ago. Actually, it was right before the pandemic, which is a little bit of a scary time to be dealing with a new health issue. Mm-hmm. And that affects my joints a lot. So I get some joint pain, fatigue. And really just kind of overall just kind of feeling crummy sometimes. And then I have the IC, and then I have endometriosis. And I also get like a lot of scar tissue. So I had a hysterectomy almost a year ago, in June of 2021, to deal with that and to remove a bunch of endo. And so those are like the main three things: is the lupus, the endo, and the IC.
Gotcha. So your body was really hit with a lot of stuff.
Yeah. And I grew up, I mean, looking back, I could see that my IC was starting to like show up sooner than I recognized it, but I grew up really athletic. Mm-hmm. So it was a difficult thing for me to wrap my mind around at first.
Right. Yeah. And I was an athlete too. And I feel like I just had to push through my symptoms because I didn't know anything else. And that was tough.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you feel like you should push through, but then you regret pushing through when you overdo it. It's always a balance.
Oh, yeah. I remember the only accommodation I ever asked for was in college. I played volleyball at college, and we have to wear those spandex, which are just like someone with IC's worst enemy.
Oh my God.
So like I was just riding the struggle bus. I would have a flare after every game, every practice. So I asked my coach, hey, can I please just wear running shorts?
Right.
And she was like, I don't know, I'll have to ask. And then she asked, whoever the person was to ask about that. And they were like, oh, well, you're supposed to really match your team. So you're going to need a note from your doctor. And I was like, oh, this is so dumb. Like at the end of it all, I was like, this isn't even worth it. Like, I'll just suck it up and wear the spandex. And that's how that went.
So that's how it ended, was you're like, I'm just going to suck it up.
Yep.
Oh, that hurts my heart. Yeah. But I don't blame you. I definitely was the same way. And even when I was in grad school for counseling people with disabilities at this like amazing program, ranked number 1 in the country for that field. And I will say, I mean, they were for the most part amazing, but nobody had really talked to me about disability rights in the context of chronic illness until I kind of sought out their university disability resource office, which I wound up eventually working for. But that was the first time, because I think even in my mind back then, I thought I had a lot of understanding about disability, but I still hadn't really pictured the variety and the diversity in the disability community like I do now.
Right.
Like, you think a lot of people don't even realize that chronic illness qualifies as a disability. And not just with disability benefits. So like in a university, like what you went through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that kind of takes me into a question I wanted to ask you, which is IC considered a disability?
Yes, it is. So technically, there are many different definitions of disability, but under the law in the United States, and a little disclaimer, definitely check with a lawyer in your area. This is educational in nature, but there are many different disability rights laws in the US. The big one that a lot of people know about is the Americans with Disabilities Act. And that defines disability intentionally in a very broad way, because our government and our legislators determined back in, the late 80s, early 90s, that so many different people were affected by disability discrimination, and that needed to be addressed. So you're considered to have a disability under the ADA if you have an impairment that significantly affects one or more major life functions. So definitely toileting would fall under that. Grooming, moving physically, like your mobility, eating, drinking, working, all of those things would qualify under that first prong of the ADA. Okay. And so with IC, like if you are having urinary frequency and urgency and difficulty voiding, bladder pain, fatigue, if you're on a low acid diet, all of those things would allow you to fall under the definition of disability, and they afford you disability rights in the US.
Okay.
But the ADA covers more than that, but that's usually the prong that people fall under for IC.
Got it. So I really don't know a whole lot about this. So what are disability rights? What does that mean?
Disability rights, it's such a good question. A lot of people, I don't even think to ask that. So disability rights address inaccessibility and discrimination in many different environments. So school, transportation, in the workplace, in the community, like when you go shopping and go to businesses, community events. Mainly, when we talk about disability rights, they're a form of civil rights where you want to make sure that you are creating access and you're removing barriers. And one way that we do that is through reasonable accommodations. And reasonable accommodations are ways that we address these barriers in schools and workplaces and in the community. And it's unfortunate that these places weren't built for everybody in the first place, but it's a way to try to address some of those issues so that everyone can access their school and their job without having to worry that their disability is going to be discriminated against. So reasonable accommodations for someone with IC, that might look like access to the restroom when it comes to like the frequency of bathroom breaks. Or it might mean having a desk that's not too far away from the bathroom. It might mean having a special place to hold your medication where you can lock it away, especially if you have like pain medication and you're in a shared office setting. It could mean being able to go to doctor's appointments without being penalized on the job or in school, rescheduling things that can be rescheduled when appropriate. And the main thing you're looking at is not just the cost of the accommodation to determine if it's reasonable, because most accommodations are free, but is it an undue burden on the school or employer? And in many, many cases, it's not.
Okay. Yeah, no, you're fantastic because I had like two other questions and you just answered them.
Oh,
so,
good.
you really know what you're doing here.
I talk about this all day long.
I love it. So what does the process of applying for disability look like?
For disability benefits, you mean?
Yes. Sorry.
No, that's okay. So for disability benefits, you want to make sure that you do a couple of things. Be as swift as you can. If you think that you're going to need them, apply sooner rather than later, because especially now, the system is so backlogged that it could take, 16 to 24 months to get approved. I mean,
wow.
We're talking potentially years, depending on the state. And unfortunately, a big part of that is that there's a really, really high chance that you're going to be denied when you first apply. And so very often I'll tell people, if you think that you need it, apply, but don't be deterred if you get denied.
Wait, so why is there a high chance of it being denied?
The reason isn't a good reason, but essentially, disability rights are a given in this country, but disability benefits are only for those who cannot be substantially gainfully employed. So that sometimes is confusing. Disability rights, things like accommodations in the workplace, accommodations in school, the right to not be discriminated against, that's a constitutional right. Whereas disability benefits were created as a program to help provide funding to people who are unable to work. So they're two separate systems, but people who are dealing with disability benefits still have disability rights. People who have disability rights might not be eligible for disability benefits.
Okay. Got
I
it.
don't know if that was like totally helpful, but essentially, when you apply for disability benefits, you need to show documentation that you are not able to be substantially gainfully employed. And there are a bunch of different things that factor into that. But one big one that tends to be easier for people to understand and to implement in their own life when they're thinking about disability benefits is, do I make more than around $1,300 a month at my job? Or am I capable of maintaining a job where I'm making more than $1,300 a month? And if the answer to that is no, and you can provide medical documentation, you could qualify for disability benefits.
Okay. Got it. No, that makes sense. So can we do a hypothetical? So
Yeah.
what if there's a person who just was diagnosed with IC? They were working a job, but the pain is just like they can't make it to work for, whatever, you know what I'm trying to say. They can't work because they have pain. So like what would happen with that person? What would they need to do? Would they have to file for the disability? What did you call that before?
Disability benefits.
Disability benefit. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So they would want to go to the Social Security Administration website. The initial application for disability benefits is not as exhausting as the application or the appeal of that. And so I would say go to the Social Security Administration website, take a look at the application. And as you're going through that, think, can I work a certain number of hours a week in, if not this job, in a different job with my educational background, with my health needs. And I would say, it really can't hurt many people to apply for disability benefits either way, because if you get denied, then you tried. But ultimately, you want to apply, gather as much documentation as you can. Don't be discouraged if you're denied at first. And if you are denied, definitely seek out an attorney in your area who can fight that. You have a much better chance of winning on the appeal than if you were to go at it alone.
Okay. So my next question would be like, if somebody can't work because of their symptoms and they get denied and they have to get an attorney, like what if they can't afford an attorney because they're not making money?
Right. So a lot of lawyers that practice in that area of law, actually all the ones that I know, they take it basically on what's called a contingency fee basis, where you pay if you win. Okay. So if you receive benefits and that's granted to you, then a portion of that would go to the lawyer that helped you get them. Okay.
That's really great that they do that.
Yeah. Well, you have to, unfortunately, because a lot of cases it's required. And I say this all the time. It shouldn't take hiring a lawyer to get what you're entitled to get, but it does make a big difference. So it winds up being worth it, because God forbid you wait 2 years and you still aren't approved and your health is not going well. The last thing that you're going to have the energy to do is fight for more benefits on your own.
Right. Yeah, no. And with you saying how long it takes for people to either be like granted these benefits or denied, like my mind is thinking, well, what are these people supposed to do in the meantime if they're not working or making income? Like, do you ever work with people in those situations?
Yeah.
What do they
unfortunately, all the time. I have a client right now who almost lost her house because she became sick and applied for her work's long-term disability coverage that she had paid into while she was employed. The insurance company denied her for some ridiculous reason, which I'm fighting with them about. But then she has spent the last year working. She just came to me. She was working with another lawyer, and she was like, I'm not hearing anything. They're not communicating with me. And like, she literally almost lost her house with her children and all of that. Until a family member stepped in to help her keep her home. But a lot of people don't have that.
Right.
So it's just the thing with disability benefits that I want to reiterate to anybody who doesn't have a disability. So there are a lot of myths and misconceptions about disability benefits. Even if you're approved for disability benefits, you're living below the poverty line. So when people say, oh, there's so many people out there that scam the system, it's not true. It's incredibly difficult to get approved, especially on your own. And you're making just enough to cover most or some of the essentials. So that's something that I combat a lot, is the kind of stigma associated with that.
Yeah.
But yeah, my clients deal with that all the time, and it's really frustrating.
Yeah, I was going to say that's got to be really frustrating for you to just, you can only help them so much.
Yeah. And the Supreme Court is taking on a lot of cases right now that, I mean, I could just totally get into the weeds about this, but they're taking on a lot of disability rights cases right now that they decided today a case about Puerto Rico residents not being eligible for the same disability benefits as, people that are not living in territories. And so the trend is a little bit alarming that we're having to fight more and more for people with disabilities than we used to. But there are also so many great disability advocates out there, people like you that are creating awareness and all of that, that I think will get us through that phase. But it's a tough time to work in disability and civil rights.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it. So I guess my next question would be is there a certain amount of time somebody has to have a condition that qualifies as a disability in order to get or to be eligible for the benefits? Does that make sense?
Yes. So not really. It makes sense, but there's not a set period of time. It's really about the permanence of your disability. And so, for example, something like IC or a lot of chronic illnesses that don't have cures, where you're always going to have symptoms, but it's about the ups and downs of managing them. Those are typically easier to show that it's a permanent condition that could make you eligible. Whereas somebody who has a condition like, let's say, they have a lower stage cancer and they have a pretty good prognosis for recovery and being able to eventually return to work, of course, knowing that everybody's body is different. And those cases can sometimes be more difficult to become eligible. But additionally, it's not usually about the time that you have it. It's about the severity.
Okay. Got it. So you would just need documentation from your doctor. Is there anything that can strengthen someone's case? I've heard people give advice of, keep a detailed log of how many times you're going to the bathroom. Does that?
Yes.
Does that help?
Absolutely. So documentation, not just on your own, but making sure that your doctor is documenting at each visit what you're logging is huge. Also, making sure that you're careful about what you post on social media. Oh. It is so frustrating, but they will, whether it's the long-term disability insurance companies or for Social Security eligibility, they can look at all of your social media posts. And even though you and I both know you can look like you're feeling great on social media and feel like crap, they will say, oh, well, she was pictured out at a concert on Saturday night. So clearly it doesn't affect her as badly as she says. Or I had a client who didn't feel physically well enough to make dinner for her family. So she went and got them fast food. And they used that because the long-term disability insurance company took videos of her taking her kids through the fast food drive-through and said, but look, she can drive her car, so she must be able to work.
Wow.
So there are all these misunderstandings, misrepresentations about what it means to have a disability, how that invisible disability isn't invisible to the person living with it, even if other people can't see it. And so documenting your symptoms and documenting how it affects you on the job or in school will be really helpful. And especially if you are in, whether it's middle school, high school, college, make sure that you're going to the Disability Services Office and documenting accommodations requests, because those can also be used to kind of supplement and show disability history.
Okay, that makes sense. That just made me think of when I was in high school. I knew that when I was more hydrated, I didn't have pain. And then when I was dehydrated, I did have pain. So they had like a no drink in the classroom rule,
Yeah.
and I had to get a note from my doctor saying she needs to drink water. So let her have water on her desk. And I didn't go through a disability office or anything like that, but that's kind of just one thing that popped into my head when you said that.
Yeah, definitely. So the water, being given access to water is a very common accommodation that I request for my clients who are like taking the bar exam or they're in college and they have finals coming up.
Or nurses aren't allowed
Yes.
to have beverages at their station.
It's so ridiculous. And I get that there are certain policies for certain reasons, but I cannot emphasize this enough. Policies that apply to everyone can and are required to be adapted when the accommodation request is reasonable. So very often I will hear employers or schools say, well, that's not how we do it here. Or if we allow you to do this, we have to let everyone do it. That's not the truth under the law. And so often it's just educating bosses and teachers about that. And if they're not receptive to it, enforcing the law.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So if somebody asks their boss for an accommodation to use the bathroom more when they're working and their boss doesn't grant that to them, like what happens then? What can they do?
So the first thing you can do to protect yourself in that scenario is to make sure that when you request it, you either do so or you follow up in writing. When you disclose that you have a disability of any kind, it can be very nerve-wracking. It can be uncomfortable. I've certainly been there in workplaces myself. And I often advise my clients, I actually have a great video on my social media and on my YouTube that goes through all the factors for disclosing your disability and documenting an accommodation request. So I can share that with you. But it is
that in the show notes.
Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, that is like really detailed. But essentially, you want to prepare yourself for starting that conversation in a way that sets you up for the most success. Not only for getting that accommodation granted, but protecting your rights if they push back against it. So let's say you go to your boss and you say, oh, I am having to use the bathroom. I just wanted to let you know, it's just my health condition. Not a big deal, but if you see me running to the bathroom, a couple times an hour or whatever today, that's just what it is. I wanted to give you a heads up. If you have that conversation over the phone or in person, just follow up with an email after and just say, thanks for understanding. I wanted to make sure you knew about my condition. I appreciate you letting me use the bathroom. If they say, no, I'm not okay with that, either in person in the moment or later to the email, that's when I usually recommend going to HR if your work has a human resources department. And if they don't, or even if they do, submitting that documentation in writing. And the documentation at that point just has to be an email stating, I have this condition. I want to talk about disability accommodations. This is what I'm requesting. And a really helpful tool for that too. So with my master's degree in disability counseling, I'm trained a lot on assessing accommodation. So I'm certainly happy to, like, if people want to email me or ask questions to me directly, feel free to reach out. I can do the disability counseling in any state, not just in Michigan where I practice law. But another great resource is askjan.org, ask ASKJAN. It's a website, and they allow you to look up disabilities by condition or workplace environments, and it'll list out potential accommodations that might apply to you. And so you can kind of go through that list, they even have mobility aids and assistive technology that might be helpful. And they might say, it might be reasonable for you to request bathroom access a certain number of times a day or as needed. Mm-hmm. And so talking to a vocational rehabilitation counselor or a disability counselor and researching accommodations for your condition can kind of, if your boss says no, it can allow you to say, okay, but I'm seeing here that I'm allowed to ask for this. So can we have another discussion about it? Mm-hmm. If they say no again, or if they say no the first time in a way where you're like, they're not going for this, you have a lot of legal options that you can take, and some are quite affordable.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That's really great information. I think that's going to help so many people, because I'm in a lot of IC support groups on Facebook, and I see things all the time that are related to this, and bosses or managers not accommodating the person who is requesting for said accommodation. So I think this is really great information for what to do if they say no, pretty much.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when you definitely, like I said, always check with a lawyer, but in your area. But a lot of the federal disability rights laws cover most states the same way. And so the EEOC is a great place to report if you're denied accommodations, but every state also has its own state civil rights office where you could report potentially to both of those places, the EEOC and the State Department of Civil Rights. And those are quick forms that you could submit. And then if you want assistance through like workplace mediation and things like that, you could also get a lawyer to help you through that. But there are tons of options. And then obviously pursuing a lawsuit is another option. It just takes a little bit longer.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So the next question I have is for someone who is interviewing for a job and whether or not they should be disclosing their IC or their potential need for an accommodation. Like, how do you recommend people handle that?
Everybody is different, but I will say it's always up to you whether or not you disclose. One benefit of disclosing is that you're typically given a better chance of feeling out whether or not the employer is going to treat you well as an employee with a disability. But a big negative of doing so is that hiring discrimination is incredibly high for people with any disability. And the thing about IC is, whereas other disabilities, perhaps, unless you have a catheter bag that's visible or tubing, or you have a spinal cord stimulator where you're having to adjust your device during the interview, they may not be able to see that you have a condition. Of course, there's always the thing going through our heads of how long is this interview going to last? Because what if I need to use the restroom? But it's totally up to you whether or not you disclose, but you will need to disclose in some way if you request disability accommodations. So that do you disclose your disability at work video that I referenced earlier, that's a really good resource to kind of go through and say, should I disclose it at the interview? Should I not? If I disclose, how do I do it? A lot of people have the best luck if they get the job and then disclose.
Okay, got it. But it's not something that they have to disclose before being hired.
No. And I've dealt with a lot of employers who say, well, we feel like we were misled because we didn't know they had a disability until after we hired them. That's an employer problem, not an employee problem. Right. That's a form of discrimination.
Right. That's
them saying we wanted the ability to discriminate against you and you took that away from us. So how dare you?
Yeah.
I had a law office that I worked for when I first got out of law school. Not my mom's. I always have to say that because my mom is also a lawyer and I don't want people to think she did that to me. But I worked for a different law office and I got the job. And then on the first day of work, I said, by the way, I want to let you know I am diagnosed with disabilities and I'll let you know if I need something. But generally, I need to be able to go to the doctors every 3 to 4 months for a couple of hours. And I will let you know in advance of any surgeries. They're not frequent, but I would be happy to discuss that. One interesting symptom about my IC that I did not expect was when my pain is really bad, my hand tremors get really bad. So my hands shake a lot when my pain is bad. And so I always had to discuss that with them and just say, I'm going to need to type instead of handwrite certain things. And so that's an accommodation that I requested. But in that meeting, my supervisor said, well, this is something you should have told us before we hired you. We wouldn't have hired you had we known that you had disabilities. Like, they literally said that to me.
Oh my God. The audacity to say that out loud.
I know. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to stay here long. And I didn't. And, ultimately it allowed me to start my own practice pursuing this type of law, which is something I knew I wanted to do anyway. But you'll deal sometimes with employers who don't realize how discriminatory they're being in an interview or when you start a new job. It's okay to process those feelings and to feel angry about it. And those feelings are natural, but just know that if they say those things to you, that's disability discrimination, that you can have legal options to pursue, just those types of comments even. And then you have a right to accommodations, even if they're not thrilled about it. And typically, once you get the accommodations ultimately approved and things settle down, employers were like, why did we make such a big deal out of this?
Yeah. So if accommodations get denied, you can take legal action?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's say you apply, you have IC and you can't do bladder installations at home because your insurance won't cover it. So you need to go to the doctor's office every Friday afternoon to get the bladder installation. One accommodation could be rearranging your schedule on that day of the week so that you make up the time that you need to for work, or you're completing the tasks that you need to complete still, but you're able to keep that appointment to better manage your IC. A lot of bosses say, oh, I don't think we can do that. That's if we let you have a flex schedule, we have to let everybody. And again, that's not true. But let's say you go to your doctor and you have them write a note, you provide that to your employer, and your employer still says no. You could file complaints not only with the EEOC and with your state civil rights department, and you could even potentially pursue a lawsuit under the Americans with Disabilities Act, depending on where you're employed, maybe even the Rehab Act, as well as in schools. So if a school denies you, like if your school had denied you the water on your desk, or even when your school they made you wear the spandex, that's something that you could have pursued legally, which I don't blame you for not doing that or not knowing that back then, but it's always an option.
Yeah, no, I feel like most people don't know that that's an option.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. Okay. So what about, I know that there are doctors out there that have, a person or their patient has come to them and said, I am interested in pursuing disability benefits.
Yeah.
And then the doctor is like, oh, well, you can work, or just something very ignorant like that. Like, how do you recommend that being handled?
Yeah, I'm so glad that you asked that. Whether it's disability benefits through the government or trying to fight for disability accommodations in work or school, a lot of doctors are not very well trained on those topics. They're really well trained, even though some don't always have the greatest bedside manner on treating your specific condition. Hopefully they're well trained in that. But when it comes to disability in work or the inability to work, they have a lot of bias and stigma associated with that they don't even realize. One great option, if that's the case, is to try to get documentation instead from every state has a free vocational rehabilitation agency. They're required to. And so in Michigan, it's Michigan Rehabilitation Services, but it's called something different in every state. So just search your state with vocational rehabilitation and you'll find the agency. You can set up a meeting with them, have them assess you for work ability as well as potential accommodations. And you can use that documentation if your doctor is not willing to give it to you. One thing to keep in mind with that is that if they say, oh yeah, no, she is able to work, obviously that might not be the answer that you are seeking. But it could provide you a lot of options, and they can even help you find a job and implement accommodations at any level. I mean, they work with people that have not graduated high school, people who have PhDs, people who were working as nurses and then got sick themselves and need to find a different type of job, or they're not able to work and they want documentation showing that. And so I would say definitely check out a vocational rehabilitation counselor. I do consulting work on that on the side, but every state has a free agency. So I usually recommend to check that out.
Yeah, that's great. So I have one more question.
Yeah.
I had one more question, but then another question popped in my head. So 2 more questions. If someone is working and let's say they're starting to miss a bunch of days of work because they're having flares or their symptoms are really bad and they were just diagnosed, can they get fired because of that?
Potentially.
Okay.
The best thing that you can do to prevent that from happening is to disclose your disability and request accommodations.
Okay.
When that happens, especially if it's like a chronic illness that's flaring, employers will often say, well, just go on FMLA or just go on short-term disability. And then when you feel better, we'll let you come back. That doesn't even need to occur. And those policies often are really limited. And typically accommodations are not even explored before your employer says, oh, just take some time off. And in the back of their mind, they're thinking, she might not come back, or we'll find a way to let her go. When you request accommodations and inform them of your disability, you're protecting yourself from potential termination because they're required to work with you and see if reasonable accommodations could be implemented. And if they deny those, or you inform them that you have a disability and they fire you, it's even easier to take legal action against them.
Okay. Got it. So there are a couple options there. Okay.
Yeah. But I would say definitely if you're worried about that, if you're missing work more frequently, that's where disclosure of your disability is more to your benefit.
Okay. Got it. All right. So last question, hopefully. So those IC bathroom cards.
Yeah.
They I have IC. I'm sure there's others out there for IBD or IBS, but do those have legal? I don't know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Are they legally enforceable?
Yes.
Yes. And for the most part, they are.
Okay. So talking about restroom access in businesses, you want to make sure that every state does have different laws about this. Generally, disability rights support your access to restrooms if you show an IC or an IBD card. But there's also in several states, I'm so sorry, my dog is barking.
That's okay. We love dogs here.
Yeah, I have a 3 or almost 4-month-old golden retriever. And
oh my God.
It's her dinner time right now. So she's going wild. But anyway, so every state or most states have passed some type of Restroom Access Act as well, where essentially if there's an employee restroom and you inform them that you have a disability that requires restroom use, you should be given access to the restroom. And if you're not, you could potentially take legal action. It's not in every state, but it is becoming a lot better and more widespread. So definitely check yours. But sometimes I know in some states it's called the Restroom Access Act. In other states, I think it's after somebody, I think it's called Allie's Law. But those IC cards can be really good for that. So if they say, oh, you have to buy something, just say that you need access to the restroom under disability rights laws. And usually they'll get scared and back down and just let you use it anyway.
Perfect. Oh my gosh. It's crazy that we have to say these things or scare people into doing the things that, we're entitled to. But you know what? We'll do it.
I know. And it's so frustrating. I started to tell you before that I dealt with that once in a Comcast store where they just refused to let me use the restroom. It was before I was a lawyer and before I knew all that I know now, but I wound up having to leave and go to a mall down the road because I could see the bathroom right there and they would not unlock it for me. It was so frustrating.
Oh, that is so frustrating. I've heard of people saying like, oh, okay, I'll just go here on the floor. Like, would you rather that? Like,
and then they act like you're just, being unreasonable. And what more relatable thing is there than needing to go to the bathroom?
Right. We all do it.
In one way or function or another, we all have to, even if you're using a catheter or ostomy bag or whatever it is. So it's just a power control thing for a lot of people. And it's also a lack of education and awareness of disability and how diverse that can be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, completely makes sense. All right. Well, I will let you go feed your dog. I really, really appreciate you coming on. And I know 100% everyone that's listening is going to appreciate this information and just be able to better advocate for ourselves. So thank you so much for the time that you gave us. And I'm looking forward to having more of a relationship with you now that I know that you have IC.
Yeah, it was so fun talking with you about all this. I appreciate, all that you do to raise awareness too. And I would love to come back on at some point and definitely talk more. And if, like I said before, if anyone has any questions, they can feel free to message me either on social media or they can email me, Ashley, ASHLEY at adaptiveinclusion.com. That's a great way to get a hold of me, even if you live outside of the state of Michigan.
Okay, perfect. That sounds good. I will link that in the show notes. And yeah, we will be, I'm sure, talking soon.